that came from that came from probably my father, who had to go through that. So where I'm going to is, can you talk about intergenerational trauma?
Yeah.
So it's coming from there.
Yes.
It just keeps going.
Yes. So intergenerational trauma is this idea that a traumatic event or events experienced by, experienced directly can be passed on through multiple generations. And of course, my interest in this really comes from my own history, right? My grandparents surviving World War II in Russia as Jews and having, entire branches of their family wiped out in the Holocaust. And then seeing, certain reactions in my mother, certain parenting, right? And then seeing how that was passed down to me. And then also noticing that a lot of my friends and a lot of my relatives with similar cultural histories and genetic histories, having very kind of similar kinds of responses, right? And so that's where like my interest in this was really kind of peaked. And so again, it's this idea that trauma can be transmitted through multiple generations and in multiple ways, right? So this idea of epigenetics, right? That
define that, please.
I'll do my best.
We're not all psychologists listening to this podcast.
No, I'll do my best. Epigenetics is this idea that our gene expression can be modified by severe trauma and stress, right? So the DNA code is not changed. The gene sequence is not changed, but how those genes are expressed can be impacted. And that can be passed on to offspring. But that's certainly, that's a big part of it, right? And I think that's fascinating. But again, it's not, it's not in my area kind of expertise, this idea of epigenetics. But it's this idea, right, that severe kind of trauma and stress can modify our gene expression, and that can be passed down. So like with me personally, since childhood, I have been a terrible sleeper. And I have a super exaggerated startle response. To all the listeners out there who want to know something interesting about me, I have a really exaggerated startle response. Actually, one of the research projects I was involved in at Stanford was setting up a stress test laboratory. And we had to calibrate the the sounds, right? The sounds, like the stress test is you're listening to like static and there's like a loud sound. And so we had to calibrate that. And we were calibrating that on me. And my physiological response, it was like through the roof. And I looked at that and I thought, geez, that's a really exaggerated startle response. And now I wonder if that's a way that the genetics I inherited from my grandparents, from my mom, who was a dissident in the Soviet Union, experienced her fair share of trauma, right? And so I'm born with like all of this in my body. But of course there's other ways, right? There's other ways that we transmit trauma to our offspring. Of course there's modeling, right? We see how our parents cope with difficult situations and difficult feelings.
Is that the most common?
I don't know if I would say it's the most common. I think it's, they're all, they all work together. They're all common and they all work together, right? And it's all parts of a puzzle that kind of fit together. So there's the modeling, but then there's the way that it's passed down through parenting, right? And through attachment.